A lot of synths have two envelopes, but in most cases they are linked to the same input signal, and that's a shame. If you use a keyboard or sequencer to fire off two envelopes, for example to modulate the filter and VCA, both envelopes are always working together and result in the same sound. However, if you use creative ways to trigger two envelopes in alternating patterns, you open up a world of rhythmic accents, shifting sonic characters, and dynamic stereo sounds. If you like to support my work or you want to get access to PDF sheets with hundreds of patch ideas I used in my videos, have a look at my Patreon. You can also support my channel through affiliate links in the video description. But now, let's dive right in. The first step of this trick is to explore alternate ways of triggering a second envelope. Here, a simple mix of two oscillators sent through a filter and VCA are making a simple voice. A single sequencer is tuning the oscillator and triggering an envelope opening the filter and VCA. A simple trick that gives a lot of control is sending a copy of the clock to a trigger sequencer and use a custom pattern to trigger a second envelope, for example to modulate the filter. This gets more exciting if you don't use the clock for the first envelope, but a pattern as well. The same concept can be set up with all sorts of modules, for example a simple clock divider. Long divisions can create accents that happen only once in a while faster uneven divisions, for example 3, add nice shifting patterns to a simple sequence. You can create the same effect with other modules like sequential switches and other clock and logic tools. Just experiment with what you have. A different approach is using something like a trigger delay or function generator to create a delayed gate. This doesn't lead to a complete independent pattern, but the time shift is great for all sorts of fun effects. I call this the envelope slapback trick and made a full video about it if you'd like to see more examples. If you like more unpredictability, you can use a random step voltage, like a sample on hold with noise as its sample input. If you clock it from the sequencer, you will have random triggers that are in sync with the clock. Alternatively, you can use something like a random gate signal if you like complete unsynced modulation boosts or pulses to the voice. To make the previous patches clear, only filter modulation was used, but you can get more creative with the second envelope. Here's a simple single oscillator voice with filter, VCA and sequencer. Instead of modulating the filter, you can use something like a clock divider to trigger a plucky envelope and modulate the frequency of an oscillator. This adds percussive accents to a simple sequence. And here's a more drone-oriented single oscillator voice expanded with a wavefolder. A random gate is opening an ADSR, and in this case the envelope is modulating both the filter and wavefolder. Just like with any modulation trick, it comes down to experimentation to see what works with your setup and modules. Here's the setup from the first chapter with dual oscillator voice and clocked trigger sequencer creating a pattern for the second envelope. The output of the VCA is multiplied and sent through a stereo frequency shifter. The envelope is modulating that effects module with a minimal pattern, creating interesting shifting delay-like effects. It's also worth it to experiment with the envelope itself. Here the same voice is used again, without the frequency shifter. This time the envelope is sent through an inverter before modulating the filter. This ducks the sound instead of making it more bright. But this can just as easily create nice shifting patterns and motion in a simple sequence. Of course, the second envelope doesn't have to be used as a direct modulation source. Here's the same dual oscillator voice with a synced clock divider triggering an envelope. In this setup, that envelope is modulating the frequency of an LFO, in turn modulating the filter. An uneven division is used, creating shifting speed bursts to the LFO. And here's a variation to the same setup, but this time the LFO is set to audio rates and sent through a VCA before modulating the filter. The clock divider triggered envelope is opening that VCA. This creates short rhythmical bursts of audio rate modulation. Besides using the shifting envelopes for character changes, they're also great for stereo effects. Here's one of my favorite tricks based on a setup used in the first chapter. A simple dual oscillator voice with sequencer and envelope opening the filter and VCA. A trigger delay is used to trigger a second slightly delayed envelope modulating the filter as well. To make this setup stereo, multiply the audio leaving the filter and send it to a second VCA. Use the VCA outputs for the left and right audio channel and use a copy of the second envelope to open the second VCA. If you can modulate the trigger delay time, you can add extra depth to this setup. This creates great sounding ping-pong slapback delay-like sounds. Here's a slightly more complex setup with a bass voice with second VCA and a divide by 3 clock divider gate triggering a second envelope. To create a stereo effect, the sine wave of an oscillator is sent through a VCA and then a panner. That oscillator is receiving a 1 volt per octave signal from the main sequencer. The envelope is opening the VCA and the divide by 6 clock divider gate is modulating the panner from one output to the other. The outputs of the panner are used to modulate the left and right VCA. This creates a burst of amplitude modulation that alters between the left and right output. And maybe the best patch, here's the same setup used before with 2 oscillators receiving the same sequence. If you send each oscillator to its own filter, it's very easy to create wonderful stereo effects. In this setup, the steady clock from the sequencer is just driving a clock divider. A divide by 3 and 4 are used to trigger the envelopes, each modulating one of the filters. This creates a melodic sequence that is divided over the stereo field with a shifting pattern. You can add VCAs if you like, but here the direct outputs of the filters are used. Of course, if you have 2 voices, you can create all sorts of other tricks. For example, you can use 2 sequencers with different lengths to create 2 independent voices. Then have the gate pattern of each voice trigger the envelope of the other to create complex patterns. I hope that gives you some new inspiration. If you'd like to learn more, have a look here, and as always, smash that like, subscribe and bell button if you want to see more modular content from me. But that's it for now, thanks for watching and see you next time.